So basically, people, we were discussing last class about how there are certain situations in which the market fails. And market failure implies that the market equilibrium does not basically generate a result that is efficient. And there are multiple situations in which this happened. We discussed a little bit of those, and we also discussed about the idea of some government policies that are used to address these situations. And we have to take into account that the different government policies used by the different administrations can have various type of effects depending on the type of industry we're talking about, depending on the type of product and how useful it is for people or how salient it is for their necessities, the effect can be increased or decreased. So the idea here is that depending on the elasticities of the demand and the supply curves, the overall effect of the policies we have seen, specifically the ones we saw about price controls, where they were a price ceiling or a price floor, can have different results. And this is a little bit of what we will show in the next slide. As you can see from this slide, this was the original market equilibrium situation, and then we placed a particular price ceiling, as we discussed last class. The tortilla maximum price basically is this type of example. And we saw that this type of policies can create an excess of demand because more people want to buy these products at these lower prices. But for suppliers, they can't cover their costs. Therefore, they opt to produce less. And that's why you have an excess of demand and people that can't get to the use of these type of products. But see how, depending on the particularities of this industry or of these curves, the supply and the demand curve, the effect of the price ceiling could be greater or could be less. So take into account how, in this case, steeper curves, they tend to have a smaller effect. And this applies not only for price ceilings, but also this happens for minimum wage. If this was more the traditional minimum wage example we did last class, where we have an excess of supply, or in this case, unemployment, more people wanting to work than what firms actually want to hire or demand to hire. If the particular elasticities of this market are more inelastic, they tend to be they tend to have a smaller effect. And that's a little bit of a takeaway from this, is that as the products become more inelastic, the overall effects of different situations tend to be smaller. And that would be the main takeaway. With this, basically, we have covered the part regarding price controls. And now we will focus on one of the most important policy tools that governments have, which are taxes. And most of us understand more or less what taxes are. But during this class, we will briefly go over a couple of them so that you have a better understanding of what type of things one must pay to the government, depending on the situation in which we're talking about. And recall that taxes are essentially a way of taking some income or taking some resources from firms or from consumers and obtaining government revenues that they can use to implement different government policies, whether they are just to pay for their payroll, basically the people that work for the government and that manage this budget, or to basically pay for the different types of programs, policy decisions they want to implement, whether that is security policies and paying for the weapons of the soldiers, or they are infrastructure policies that imply building a bridge on a highway, or other type of policies that regard like a social program in which some things are given to certain people. All of those things have a cost. And the only way of paying for them is if the governments basically levy taxes. And they levy taxes on the population. And there's a variety of taxes, as I'm mentioning in this slide. So if we take a little bit into account this, the type of taxes that one must face affect our resources, affect our income, affect the prices that we must pay. Therefore, when we think about the actual money we have to think more in the terms of disposable income. And disposable income is the actual money I get after taxes. When the government decides to levy an income tax on the population and they take certain percentage of their income, well, the disposable income with which you can afterwards pay for things is smaller than your actual income. So obviously, depending on, on which side of the population you're on, sometimes you will basically have to pay taxes, and some other groups of the population will receive certain transfers. And even the same type of people could receive transfers and later on have to pay taxes for them, or vice versa. And think of how many governments in the world are currently doing economic stimulus plans in which they are basically spending a lot of money to give some resources to people that have become unemployed, or that their businesses are basically like on hold due to the pandemic. All of those resources, all of those programs, all of that stimuli will have to be paid eventually, whether it is next year or down the line, depending on what type of revenue streams the government has. So obviously, the same people can be paying for some taxes and receiving some form of transfers. That is valid, and the point is that both of them affect your budget set, affect the way you decide to consume things. And the optimal consumption bundle, remember, changes depending on how big or small your budget set is. Certain taxes in particular, or certain subsidies, which are transfers that affect specific products, obviously also affect the budget set, but in this case, they affect the prices of those goods, therefore tilting the budget set inwards or outwards, depending on basically if the price got increased because of a tax, it is tilted inwards. If the price got decreased because of a subsidy, then the budget set tilts outwards. And that is the overall effect that it has on the budget set. So there are a couple of important taxes that I want to stress out here so that you remember some of them, because most of you will probably encounter them throughout your life. So one of these type of taxes are called value taxes or ad valorem taxes. And they are essentially consumption taxes in which a specific tax is levied against a product, and the price of that product increases. So what you see in the particular formula I'm showing at the slide is that the new price is actually a percentage increase of the original price that would have been without the tax. So a couple of examples that I place here are airline tickets, cigarettes, alcohol, and sugar-based drinks, in which they have specific value taxes that they charge a percentage of the price and add it up. And that's why when you decide to basically, when you're booking a flight to, like, I don't know, any place you want to travel, and you're selecting the fare, and you're selecting the seats, and if you're taking luggage or whatever, and all of those costs add up. Suddenly, once you get to the part you need to pay, there is an important increase between what's the actual price and is the final price. And some of them are a bunch of different taxes. One of them is this type of value taxes. Another of the very big and important taxes that exist, obviously, are income taxes. And income taxes are a tax on your rents, basically would be like the literal translation, but basically that is an income tax. And an income tax, what happens is that the amount of money you get paid for something, like your salary, gets discounted. So as you see in the formula, my net income is a smaller income than what I would have received without taxes, because the government takes away around like 30% of my income in basically just in income tax. Um, Depending on how much you earn, every single country has different tax brackets and you pay different percentages. In Mexico, you range like from 0% to like 34%. And the idea is that income taxes should be progressive, which means that the higher you earn, the more money you can pay, and the more you should pitch in for the government's revenues to try and help out other less fortunate people in society. That is the idea behind progressive taxes in general, and they are very easily explained through the income tax. Questions regarding the income tax? So the last tax I want to take a look into is something called a lump sum tax. And I want to specify this lump sum tax because it's more of a theoretical type tax, but it it helps explain this idea of how the government should redistribute based on the second welfare theorem of economics that we discussed last class. And the idea is that it would be a tax in which they are giving or taking, sorry, a fixed amount of money of people from your income without any type of transaction cost. It would be something like if every person should have to pay, I don't know, a tax of 1,000 pesos, regardless of how rich or poor you are. So obviously, this type of tax are really easy to charge because like everyone has to pay this amount of money, and they could literally just discount it like from your paycheck. It would be really simple. But obviously, it would be really regressive and affect the poorest people because for Carlos Lim or to Carlos Lim, a 1,000 peso lump sum tax is irrelevant with regards to his income and his wealth. But for some person that is earning a minimum wage of 3,000 something pesos a month, taking out 1,000 pesos would be a third of his entire or her entire paycheck. So that's a little bit why there are no lump sum taxes. There are lump sum transfers in Mexico through or basically lump sum subsidies for different government social programs. So that's why I wanted to show you a how a lump sum tax is shown or is depicted, because taxes are like the mirror opposites of certain subsidies. Think of subsidies as a transfer from the government in different ways. They can transfer to your income. They can transfer it on the price with a subsidy directly on the price of a good. They can do a lump sum transfer with regards to certain social programs, like for the Viejitos program, the old age program is a lump sum transfer in which if you are above 65 years old or something like that, and you go with your ID to the government's office, they pay you, I think, like 2,000 pesos a month or something like that. Maybe it's every bi-week. But the point is that no matter if you are an old person who is very rich and lives at Las Lomas de Chapultepec, or you are an old person that lives in Iztapalapa and in a poorer neighborhood, you still receive the same amount of money. So there are lump sum transfers because they have a greater effect on poor people, and you don't care if it has a very small effect on rich people, but they tend to not be any type of lump sum tax because it would be the other way around. So with regards to subsidies, think of them as the mirror opposites of the taxes. And that is important because for modeling purposes, we have to show a little bit what is the effect of a tax. And that's, I think, the next slide.